Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on how to talk about abuse during prenatal education classes. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people who've been living and working on the lands across Canada for thousands of years, including the land where you're watching this webinar from today. The Health Nexus office in Toronto is located on the historical territory of the Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nations. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory. We are still working at getting the presenter online, but that is okay because I do have a couple of things, a couple of housekeeping items that I can get us started on. So as you can see on the screen, you've got the main presentation on the main screen. Below that, there are some files which you can download, and most of those files are available on different websites, including the Best Start website, and I will give you the link to the Best Start website where all the abuse related files are located. And you can also see on the right-hand side at the bottom the chat pod. So if you do need to see some, provide some information, you can ask your questions in there. We have muted all the lines, as you've noticed, including our presenters, it sounds like, but we can still get started with some general things. So anyway, we will be having a question period at the end of the session. I will just make sure you're familiar with the website, and I can share my screen here to
Can you hear me?
show you. Yes, we can hear you. Yeah,
Continue. Want you to know I'm here.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Stand by, and I'm just going to do the little presentation on the website of the Prenatal Education Key Messages, so everybody is familiar with those, and hopefully everybody can hear me at this time. So that is all. Basically, a few years ago, there was a need for all service providers in Ontario to provide the same messages to pregnant women and their partners. And in order to do that, we've developed that Prenatal Education Key Messages for Ontario. And I know this is the third English webinar. Some of you have already gone through this, but basically on this website, we have 25 different topics. Today we will be looking more at the abuse one, abuse during pregnancy. And as you can see, there's the key messages. Those are all the messages that ideally every service provider would be providing to pregnant women and their partners. And behind that is all the supporting evidence including statistics, what it looks like, all kinds of information and supporting evidence. Then you're also provided with some resources and links, some that you can provide to your clients and some that are for yourself as a service provider, helplines and everything. And there are also some references. So let's say there's supporting evidence and there's a little number 11 here. You can go in the reference and you can see what the relevant reference is for that. So you can also register for updates if you want to find out if we've updated anything on the website, because we do try to stay abreast of new information. You can register to receive any updates. And all the key messages themselves, the part that you can provide to clients, are available for download in one part of the website here. So I'll go back to this, and we can go back to stop sharing, and I should be able to go back to the PowerPoint. And I think now we do have our presenter is available online, and we'll just do a quick sound check. But basically, it's Margaret Arnason. She's the Training, Resource, and Outreach Coordinator for the Assaulted Women's Helpline, and I will let her take over at this point.
Hello, everybody. Everybody can hear me, right? Okay. Great. So I apologize for some of the technical difficulty signing in, but I'm glad that everybody is here. If you have any questions or if something's not clear, please use the chat box. As she said, my name is Margaret Arnason. I am from the Assaulted Women's Helpline. So we are a crisis line for abused women. We are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So basically we never close. We have 254 languages. So we service women from all over the province of Ontario, as well as Nunavut. We are completely and totally confidential and anonymous. So when I say that, we don't have call trace, we don't have call display, we don't call women back, so we can confidently say that we are absolutely positively confidential and anonymous. So that's my first blurb. I see that people are answering a little podcast here.
Yeah, the little poll has been put up there to see which sector represents the workplace for which you provide prenatal education, just to get a sense. I see that there are a lot of public health people online, and we'll give I think most people have responded, but most people are from public health, who provides a lot of prenatal education programming. So we can go back to the PowerPoint, but I think you also had another poll which perhaps we can put right at this point, and I'll let you read it and comment on it, Margaret.
Okay, so before we start, one of the things I want us to think about is that, you know, we all work in social work, whether you're a nurse or however you want to refer to it. I think one of the things is we are always so cautious of being politically correct and saying the right things and putting out the right things, but to really do this workshop well, I really want to know what people are actually thinking and what people are actually doing. So if you can be honest with yourself, and you're answering this question that's up, so being honest, what is the most frustrating to you when you're seeing a pregnant woman in an abusive relationship? And I just want people to give me honest answers so we know what we're working with versus what the nice answer is to say. So know that it's confidential, so I don't know who you are, so I don't know how you voted. But I think most people have voted, so let's give people a minute to all connect so we have an idea. And the reason I ask this question when people are just voting it is not that it's a bad thing, it's just helpful sometimes for us to challenge our own thoughts and what we think and how we feel, because that comes out in how we talk to women. As much as we might have all the right language, if we don't mean what we're saying, it comes out differently. Okay, so looking at it, for most people, the struggle is pretty much, I just don't know what to say, right? So there is some stuff about why don't they just leave, which is always a good question. And why are they having another baby, which is also a very good question. But I think the main theme that I'm seeing is they just don't know what to say. And I think that's really hard for anybody when we try to think of, what do I say when I'm dealing with a woman, right? What do I say when I'm talking to somebody, right? So let's first just do a quick overview. I didn't go through the key messages. I'm going to assume that everybody is on board with the standard principles. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, verbal, psychological, and mental kind of all go together. Neglect, financial, and harassment. So one of the things I will say about emotional abuse / psychological abuse is that's probably one of the hardest things for women to identify. Okay, so it's a little bit harder because bruises and marks you see, you don't necessarily see verbal scars. Okay? So, sorry, before I go there, so let's just talk a little bit about that. So we talk about what's really hard to say. And I think sometimes the hardest thing, which is hard for us to think about, is it's really hard to know what to say because of how we feel. And sometimes people look at it like it's really hard to know what to say because I don't want to say the wrong thing to her. But I would challenge us to say that sometimes not knowing what to say is not about being worried about what we're saying to her, it's about worried about how we feel. Because domestic violence or violence against women impacts so many people in so many ways. And it's one of those things that people like to keep secretive and private. So when we try to talk to women, sometimes those feelings come up within our own self. Those feelings of shame, or this is not a topic that I should be talking about, or this is nothing that I should be engaging with, often comes up for ourselves. So that's why I kind of asked you to think about what bothers you, and I want you to take that away later on today, is the struggle knowing the right words to say to her because I feel uncomfortable, or do I not know the right words to say to her to support her? Okay, so I just want you to think about that as we move through this workshop. Okay, so we talk about empathy versus sympathy. And it sounds really simple, right? When we talk about empathy, it's about empathizing with the feeling. And sympathy is about feeling sorry for someone. And sometimes people will say, well, what's the difference, right? You know, I feel bad for her. It doesn't mean that I can't empathize with her. But what I would say to anybody is, Do you want somebody to feel bad for you, or do you want somebody to empathize with how you're feeling? And an example I'll give is it's okay to understand that she's upset about losing her partner, right? You can empathize with the feeling. I understand that if your partner wasn't here, it'd be really hard for you to be able to take care of the baby. Versus, oh, if your partner's not here, yeah, it's going to be really hard for you to deal with the baby, but you have to, right? I'm saying the same thing, but one of it is just validating her feeling. Because sometimes when we talk about saying the right thing, that's part of our struggle. The struggle is about, I don't want to condone the relationship. Or vice versa, I don't want to judge her because we don't judge people, right? But if you're able to forget about right or wrong and actually just focus on how she's feeling, it's very easy to empathize and to support her at that moment. That's what we need to remember. If you're able to focus on the feeling, then you can be empathetic. If you're only focusing on what happened, that's when you're being sympathetic. So that's one of the things when you're talking to a woman and she's talking to you, how you respond is so important. Because if you sound like you come from, a place of not caring. So, for example, when you call, let's say, a phone company, and you call TELUS, and you say, I'm really angry because this happened. The person on the phone says, oh, Miss Arnason, I'm very sorry to hear that. Can I call you Margaret? If I understand you correctly, and then they're going to repeat whatever I asked. Your phone bill isn't correct. I'm very sorry that happened, Miss Arnason. Can I please put you on hold while I look into that for you? Then they're going to come back and they're going to fix it. They're going to say, I'm very, very sorry this happened to you. I'm very sorry you were inconvenienced. We're going to give you a $10 credit to supplement your inconvenience. Has this resolved your issue? Yes. Have I resolved your issue for calling TELUS today? Yes. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No. Thank you so much for your business and have a nice day. Did they follow everything they were supposed to do? Absolutely. Did they resolve my issue? Absolutely. Do they give a damn? Absolutely not. And that's what I want us to think about when we're talking about how do we support abused women. Sometimes we're so focused on the right words to say, the right protocol to follow, the right check boxes to click. We miss the bigger picture. The bigger picture is it's not just about the words that you say. It's about how you say it. If you sound like you're a TELUS operator, where you're just going through the motions but you don't mean it, then she won't believe you, and she won't tell you anything, and she won't feel comfortable because everything about you says, I don't believe you, or everything about you says, you should just leave, or everything about you says, this is ridiculous, why am I having this conversation again? Okay, so we talk about empathy versus sympathy. I really want you to focus on that, okay? So listen, don't just hear. And when I say listen and don't just hear, this is a really hard part for us too, right? Because everybody that's on this website is here because we want to help people, right? It's our goal to help people. So when you want to help people, what are you looking for? You're looking for the solution, right? You're looking for the solution to the problem. So as soon as she starts speaking, you're thinking of all the different things that you need to do. You're thinking of all the services you can refer her to, all the places you can refer her to, all the conversations you can have. So are you really listening to what she's saying? Or are you just focusing on all the things that you think that need to be done? Okay? So that's why I ask questions about her safety first. So when she says to you, my partner hit me, for example, ask a question about how do you feel? Are you okay? Where is he now? The questions you don't want to ask are, what did you do? And unfortunately, most people's first question they ask a woman when she discloses abuse is actually, what did you do? And that's not because they're mean. That's just because that's the first thing that comes out of their mouth. Because it's hard to imagine that somebody would hit you just because. But going back to how we shut somebody down, think about what that would look like. So again, when I'm saying listen, you have to actually hear what she's saying. And as you're listening and you're asking questions about her safety and how she feels and what she wants to do, then you're letting her know that you're listening to her that you care about her and that you're asking her, right? And here's the really, really hard one. Respect what decisions she's made. I think that's the hardest thing for anybody because it goes back to what we just talked about. You're in this field because you care. You're in this field because you want to make a difference. You're in this field because you want to help people, right? Most people didn't wake up and say, I really want to be a nurse or I really want to be in social work because it's so much money, I don't know what else I could possibly do with my life, right? So when somebody says to you, you know what, he hits me but I love him, or he's really mean to me but I'm going to stay because I have a baby, sometimes it's really hard for us to accept those decisions. It feels really, really uncomfortable to understand that decision, right? But what we need to remember, as I said, is it is her decision. And there might be consequences to those decisions, but it's her decision. So you need to understand it's not your responsibility to make her change her mind. It's not your responsibility to remove her from that situation she's in. It's your responsibility to give her information. It's your responsibility to make her feel empowered. It's your responsibility to make her know that you care and that there's options and resources to her. But sometimes we get confused between what's our responsibility and what her rights are, right? So it also doesn't mean, just so we're really clear, it doesn't mean that you're supporting her bad decisions. And this becomes very tricky, right? Because how do I not support the bad decision, but yet support the client? And it goes back to what we talked about, empathy versus sympathy. You can support how she feels in regards to making that decision. For example, she says, I cannot leave my husband because he sponsored me and I'm scared to be deported. An answer is not, well, he can't deport you or that's what a lawyer is for, versus, I understand why you'd be really afraid. Deportation sounds very scary. Do you know that you can speak to a lawyer so they can give you some options and choices? I didn't tell her that she has to leave. I didn't tell her that that's not true. I told her that I acknowledged her feeling about immigration. I told her what some of her options are, but nowhere in there did I tell her, but you have to leave. And that's the piece where it becomes a little bit tricky for us because, again, we want to tell the person what to do. We want to tell the person how to fix it. And when we say supporting sometimes, people think that means that I'm going to support her and say, yes, I think you should stay if he's hitting you. If you think it's a good idea, you should stay. Versus, I'm really concerned about you. If you see that your safety is at risk and he's hitting you, what are you going to do to keep yourself safe if it gets worse? That doesn't mean, again, that I'm supporting her staying with him. But it does mean that I'm supporting the decision of how am I going to keep you safe. Right? So it becomes a little bit tricky. Does anybody have any questions? I'm looking at my little box. Nobody has a question?
Maybe the questions will come a little later, and we can let them come in as they come, and maybe get back to that point if needed. Yeah.
No worries, no worries. So some basic do's and don'ts. So what I would suggest, and again, I know different prenatal groups or different programming might run a little bit differently, so that might be a little bit of a challenge. But when we kind of talk about how to talk to a woman or how do I address an issue of violence in a group, one of the things that I would say is helpful is always setting up one where you have one-on-one with people anyways. So whether it is a 2-minute conversation that you have with every woman where you're just like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? Can we, talk about whatever on a regular basis? Because what will happen is that if you never ever do that and something happens and you suspect that there's abuse and you individually pull that person out, everybody's going to wonder why you pulled Margaret out. Why is she talking to Margaret? What's happening? And Margaret herself is going to feel really uncomfortable because why are you pulling me out, right? What's taking place? What's happening? So if possible, that's whether it's a group session or whether you do, training or whatever it is, if it is possible to always have a one-on-one with people at different times, at different moments, just so that if you do call that person out, it doesn't seem unusual, right? It doesn't seem different. If you have co-ed, where I know sometimes men attend, I would say the same thing. Take 2 minutes out, even if it's just to ask them, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about the baby? How's everything going? Which again, then when you want to have a conversation with her, it doesn't seem unusual, because if you only have conversations with them together and then you try to pull her aside to have a personal conversation, if she's in an abusive relationship, she's not going to be able to do that, right? It's going to be a problem, because he, A, is not going to want her to do that, or B, it's going to raise red flags, because why is that happening right now? Why are you pulling her apart from me? And if something happened in that workshop, or something happened the night before, or something's taking place where she said something, he's probably not going to let her come meet with you, or they're not going to come back. And that's why I'm saying, if you kind of set up an atmosphere that's normal, that you pull people in or out or whatever at different times, then it doesn't seem so unusual, so you can have that conversation with her. What I would also say is, try to have different topics. So I know that it's a given that in prenatal you talk about many different things. But I would say to ensure that you talk about that from the beginning, and that you don't necessarily make domestic violence one of your first topics. And that's because, again, if somebody's in the room, they might feel like this is about them. Or that you see something one day, for example, you see bruises or marks on a woman, and you think there's an issue of violence, and that's the topic you bring up next week. Because they're going to feel like they're isolated, they're going to feel like you've noticed, and they might not come back. Because again, violence against women is quote-unquote very secretive, very embarrassing. What would be better, for example, is that you kind of put it out in advance. We're going to have workshops about these different topics, guys, at different times. But these are the workshops we're going to have. So when you do have that workshop on violence against women, or you have a presenter on violence against women, or you hand out a brochure on violence against women, however you want to do that, it doesn't seem unusual, right? So that person doesn't feel like they're ostracized or being picked out or something that's happened, right? It seems like this conversation is for everybody, right? So everybody is engaging. It's not just about me. We talk about having sheets, cards, or information packages, the same thing. Unless at every presentation you give something after the presentation or after that workshop, then it might be better just to have one sheet. So what we talk about sometimes is having a sheet that has a whole bunch of information on it, not a giant booklet that becomes cumbersome and people can't keep it, but even like a card or like a bookmark, but something that just has the basic emergency numbers. So this is poison control, this is 211, this is the food bank number, this is the Assaulted Women's Helpline, but that if her partner sees that paper, there's really no reason to throw it away. All right? This paper is not specifically about violence. This paper is not specifically about us. This paper is specifically about resources in the community that we just might need, right? So that's why I say it's always really important, I say whenever possible, to have a sheet that mixes kind of everything up. So that way she's able to keep it. Because for most abused women, if you hand her a brochure or a pamphlet about violence or abuse, she will not be able to keep that, right? It's going to cause problems. He's going to get upset with her. He's going to get mad. So it's really hard for her to keep that information. And again, as opposed to an information sheet that has lots of information on it, then it's not a problem to have it. Always advise clients they can talk to you. And sometimes people say, this is a given. Of course clients can always talk to me. But again, what do I think I can talk to you about, right? If you say to a client in a meeting, you can always come and talk to me if you have any concerns about your pregnancy. Or you can always come and talk to me if you have any questions about parenting. Then that person might not feel like they can come and talk to you about other stuff, because you kind of set a boundary for them. And again, like I said, violence against women is very embarrassing, right? This is nothing that you stand on the bridges and talk about. So it might be more appropriate to have a conversation when you talk to people about, hey, this is who we are, we're here to support you, and then give a range. If you have any concerns at home, if you have concerns with your relationship, if you have concerns for your safety, if you have concerns about parenting, if you need information on a local food bank, if you want to know, talk about any concerns you have, know that you can talk to me. So again, you're giving a range so that if you go and talk to that person, it doesn't sound like, oh, she must be talking about this topic, but that you give such a range that that one person comes to talk to you, they can easily tell their friends, oh, I just went to ask her about the food bank. Oh, I just went to ask her about, why I'm gaining so much weight, or if I have a problem with something, right? So it's just remembering that sometimes it's the things that we don't set up that are the problems later on. So it's not so much about, we've got these great pamphlets on violence against women, or I really want to know what to say. It's, are you giving an open invitation to people that they feel comfortable to come and talk to you about it? Because if I don't feel comfortable, I'm going to be really reluctant to talk to you. I'm not sure what you're going to say, and if I'm not sure what you're going to say, I don't know if I want to talk to you, right? So that's what I'm saying, was that even though it seems really simple and things that you probably do every day, try to literally incorporate that into how you say that, right? Like, how do you say that? What does that look like? Okay?
At this point, we were going to have a little poll, and while that is up, maybe Margaret, you could look in the chat box, and Ingrid has posed a good question that we could respond to perhaps, or I'm not sure if it's later in your presentation. What if you're in a group setting and one client starts talking about her abuse openly and wants to really get into it with everyone around and what to do? And meanwhile, while you think of the answer, we could just fill out that poll that's on the screen. Being honest with yourself, do you think there's a higher ratio of abused women in certain groups? And you can see the options A, B, C, D. And we'll take in your vote, and Margaret can comment both on the poll and on the question being asked.
I'll do them one in the same. I'll just give people a minute, and then I'll respond. Okay, so I'm going to assume most people have responded. So I'm going to answer the question first, and we're going to go back to the poll. So if you just want to leave it up for me so I don't forget. So in regards to somebody who openly starts talking about abuse and wants to talk about it, is, sometimes it's hard, right? Because that person is disclosing. You don't want to be rude and be like, shut up, this is not the place, don't talk like that. But also it's knowing that it's not the place, right? Because there's a few issues. Number one, for that client herself, she might feel like it's a really safe space, and this is the space that I want to talk about it. But if she doesn't get a good response from the other people in the room, she's going to shut down. And she's not going to feel like it's a safe place, and she might not want to come back because she's going to be very embarrassed or very uncomfortable, or feel, kind of left out or disproportioned, right, based on what happened, right? And I think what we need to remember is how do you respectfully redirect her? And I think one of the issues is what we struggle with is what the topic is, right? Because that person started talking about watching the movie last night, and I was watching, This Is Us, and this happened and that happened. Most of us are really experienced facilitators and can redirect that conversation quite easily. But because it's an issue of violence or abuse, we all shut down. And what you're going to find is often the room shuts down. So what I would say is, in the sense of her, that's just how it impacts her. I'm going to talk about how to fix it. But also knowing how it impacts the room. Because sometimes people are like, well, I'll just let them speak because it's a good segue to a conversation. But because you don't know who else is in the room or what's being triggered by that, it's really dangerous to have this person talking when you don't know what she's going to say. Because if you're talking about a controlled discussion about violence against women, you can know what the conversation will be. When people are just disclosing personal stories, you can't be sure what they're going to say or how that's going to trigger other people. So as much as some people might be like, it's good to hold the discussion, we have to be really careful that we're prepared for it, because we have to make sure we're watching everybody else that's happening. So going back to, for lack of a better word, is shutting it down and being quite cold in my language, but shutting it down, is first of all acknowledging what the person said. So, wow, Margaret, that must have been really hard for you. Or Margaret, that's really serious. Violence impacts so many of us in our lives. Because we're talking about, whatever, children, parenting, whatever the topic is, it's probably, why don't we refocus back onto this? But that's something that I would really would like to talk to you about. Can we talk about it at break? Or, you know what, we're going to actually have a guest speaker come in next week or next month or whatever and talk about it as well. And this is a conversation that we could all share in. But for now, can we talk about whatever? But if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. So it's doing two things. One, I'm redirecting the conversation back to what it should be about, which again is controlling the conversation. Because we don't know who or what we're going to trigger in that room if we ask that conversation to continue. But I'm also not just shutting her down and saying this is not an appropriate conversation, or I don't want to talk about that, or why don't you come see me later. So even though I am giving her the option of coming to see me later, I'm also acknowledging her feelings, right? Like I'm acknowledging how that feels, acknowledging that, that must have been really hard, or that can be really impactful, or violence impacts so many of us. Right? Because you want to make it normalized in the sense of she's not an outcast or how dare you say that. But again, you also don't want to then open a can of worms where a whole bunch of different people just start talking. Because if we can't control what that person's going to say, it becomes problematic. Okay, so that's what I said. So I know it's a little bit harder because of the topic, but I really encourage people to look at it the same way you would look at it if the person was talking about a TV show or a movie, or how else, people get distracted, is to try to redirect the conversation back to the topic at hand, but still being supportive to the original comment. What is the current technology? Is it okay to use the word abuse, or are we using another word? So that's one of the questions somebody asked. So I think that is a good question. One of the things I would say, it depends on who you speak to, because going back to being politically correct, everybody has something else fancy to say. So what I would say is some people say things like abuse is not a good word. I would say I call it out for what it is, right? Violence against women is abusive. It's even how, for example, I use the word domestic violence. I rarely use the word domestic violence. I usually say violence against women. Because domestic violence minimizes what it is, right? If you say things like it's inappropriate, then you minimize what's taken place. If you say it's inappropriate for your boyfriend to call you names, then that sounds like you're having a discussion, when you're like, it was inappropriate that you came in late. And you're minimizing what actually took place versus that behavior is abusive. That behavior is unacceptable. Those are things that I would say, for me, is how I use those words. So I do use the word abuse. I do use that very bluntly because I think people need to understand the seriousness of it. Because, again, violence against women, it's so easy. Well, the right word is easy, but it's easier to try to minimize it, right? To minimize what happened, to dismiss what happened. So if we use dismissive words, then it's easy for me to downplay what took place. So just thinking about the poll, so I'm sure everybody read it, but just in case, do you think there's a higher ratio of abused women in certain groups? So women of color and immigrants, low-income women, A and B, about 40%. And it's equal in all groups, about 58.6%. So what I would say, it's my experience, that it is equal in all groups. But I will say that statistically, if you look at statistics, it will say immigrant women, women of color, and low-income women. I would, however, say the reason that that stands out, or the reason that we have those statistics, the reason that that's our experience, is who are the women that you would connect with? And sometimes we need to remember that in this field, as a general rule, how many people necessarily connect, right? So if I've got a good job, am I probably at a parenting class in the afternoon? Probably not, to be honest with you, right? I'm probably not at a prenatal program. I'm at work, right? So for a lot of people that have a higher income bracket, they are not attending the groups. For a lot of women that have a higher income bracket, if I'm abused by my partner, I have the financial resources to go to my EAP program at work. Or I have the financial resources that I don't need to go to a social worker and ask them to write me a letter for priority housing. Or I'm not attending, like I said, these different groups because I'm going to my own therapist, my own doctor. So a lot of the statistics we have will show that immigrant women or low-income women are more likely to do that. But reality is, they're just more likely to be reported. So I want us to think about this about statistics. Who's more likely, and also who's more likely to be charged. Because if I go to a quote-unquote priority neighborhood, so one of the lower income neighborhoods, and the police show up at my house, they're more likely to charge that person than if they go to Post Road or a very upscale neighborhood. How do I talk? How do I engage? Who am I? And racism is very real, right? So not to underestimate that even that alone and who disproportionately is in jail and who disproportionately gets charged more is based on race and class. Another question, would higher education income women be less willing to report less times in the year? Very likely. So part of it about, reporting, and I'm just going to be blunt, for anybody that knows the system, that knows what happens when you report an issue of domestic violence, for many people the decision is not to report. So if you think about it, for example, you guys in your field, so you guys are nurses, you're social workers, you're in the community, where do you go if you want support? Who are you reporting that to? Because again, do I want to see somebody that I know? Do I want to go to a community clinic and say I was abused where I might meet my friend? Do I want to go to an agency to get counseling when I might do a workshop with them or I might want to apply for a job there? So for a lot of women that have a quote-unquote higher education or more income, they have other resources and options. So A, they know the system, and B, they have other options. So I don't necessarily need to go to the shelter if I want to leave my partner because I have a job, so I go and rent my own place. Or I might have friends or family, or I might do different things that help me do that. So that's what I would say. I think in general, that's part of it, right, is how we take care of ourselves based on our social economic status and our ability to move through that system. Okay, so race, class, and culture make a difference in reporting assault. Absolutely. So we talked about it a little bit right now, but let's talk about what else is happening for me. Are they going to believe me? And very similar to what I just said about who am I and who is he, right? So I'm an immigrant woman, right? I don't speak very good English. My husband speaks perfect English. My husband told me that if I report it, he's going to call the police, I'm going to be arrested, or he's going to deport me. Those are really serious things, right? Because for many women, they don't understand what that means. So we have women that will call the Assaulted Women's Helpline, and they'll actually say, my husband assaulted me. They won't use the word assault, actually. My husband hit me, or my husband's hurting me. I want you to call him because this is Canada, and he can't do that. So it seems really lighthearted and sarcastic sometimes. People are like, what do you mean? Because they don't understand. So even though they might understand that in Canada, quote unquote, your husband's not allowed to hit you, they don't understand the process. They don't understand what happens. They don't understand the system. So sometimes when we say things like, call the police, you have the right to call the police, sometimes it might be explaining what that looks like. Because in my country, the reason I might be in Canada is because the police came to my house and raped me. Or the police came into my house and killed my husband. Right? Or the police are out to get me. They're not my friends. They're corrupt. So sometimes where I'm from and my culture is very important because the police are not always my friends. Right? Did I grow up here where the whole message is police are your friends? And also what community did I grow up in? Because again, if I grow up in a community that is disproportionately poor and disproportionately minorities, what is my relationship with the police? And the police are not necessarily my friend. And if I see that last week they dragged Billy down the hall and assaulted him when they arrested him, I'm very cautious to call on my husband right now. Because for most women, it's not about wanting him to be arrested. It's about wanting the abuse to stop. And that's what I want you guys to think about. For most women, this is not, and that's why we say call the police. It's not about wanting the person to go to jail. Most women that call the police because they're scared for their life. That's the choice of words most women use. They called the police because they were scared for their life. They didn't call the police because he hit me. They didn't call the police because he slapped me. They didn't call the police because he pushed me. They called the police because they were scared for their life. They thought that he was going to kill them, is the standard response most women give. Okay, so I want you to think about that. Also, what culture am I from? So going back to community, what are people going to say about me, right? In talking to some women from the First Nations community, they talk about, it's very shameful on the reserve when they call police, right? If they call outside of the reserve police, people get mad at them. You're bringing people here. You're insulting us. You're making them think bad about us. They're going to talk bad about us as a community, right? Some South Asian communities. I'm Muslim. People are going to talk about Muslim people. People are going to talk about Muslim men. If I call, they're going to reiterate the stereotype that all Muslim people are violent. So the things that a lot of us wouldn't think about in regards to my rights are things that many other women of color think about, right? Well, how are they going to treat me? How is my community going to treat me? And for many of these women, it's real. And I want us to remember that, because sometimes people are like, they'll say things like, well, if her synagogue doesn't want to talk to her, just go to another one. But we have to remember, for a lot of these women, this is my community. This is how I function, right? This is how my life works. This is what kept me safe. This is what kept my grandmother safe. This is what kept my mother safe, right? So we need to remember it's not as simple as just picking up the phone and calling the police. And I will say, as somebody who's born here, that's a Canadian perspective, right? The police are your friends. But depending on who you are, the police don't always seem like our friends, right? And I'm afraid to call the police, right? So let's assume now that we've found this abused woman and we have concerns. Ask the questions you need to ask, not the questions you want to ask. And I know that sounds kind of weird. People are like, what do you mean by that? Is human curiosity, sometimes we just ask a whole bunch of questions because you want to know when it happened and why it happened and where it took place and what happened over here and what happened over there and what was, but do we really need to know that? Or are we just asking because we want to know that, right? And maybe there's some questions that we do need to know. Maybe we do need to know where the children were. Because of course, if the children are at risk, the children are seeing violence, that's a different issue, right? That's a children's aid issue. But what else am I asking, right? Because going back to what I talked about, not sounding like you're a telephone operator, not sounding like you're doing a script, ask a question that I need to know, right? Are you okay is a question that I need to know. If she has children, where was the baby is a question that I need to know. But where is he from is not a question I need to know. What does he do for a living is not a question I need to know, right? How often does it happen might be a question I need to know. But maybe the bigger question is, has it happened before? So versus how often does it happen, perhaps the question is, has it happened before? Because one question is a judgmental question. How many times has it happened? Point being, how many times have you let him hit you and you're still there? Versus, has it happened before? Where you're asking about her, right? You're asking a more open-ended question. And that's why I said, well, sometimes it's just all about the language and the delivery, not about anything that's fancy. It's making people feel like you truly care, which is really hard. And when I talk about asking too many questions, again, sometimes it's letting the conversation flow. Because if you're like, when did it happen? Why did it happen? What happened? How many bruises do you have? How many marks did you have? Did you go to the police? Didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you go to the police? Did you go to the doctor? If all you're doing is bombarding her with questions, then again, she feels like you're just marking off a check sheet, right? And again, some of these questions you might need to ask. But it's how do you put that into a conversation, if at all possible? You told me that he hit you yesterday. Have you gotten a chance to see a doctor yet? Versus, you need to go to the doctor, which maybe she does. Have you gotten a chance to see the doctor yet? I understand that you just said that, it's happened before, but only a couple times. How long ago was that? Because you're getting the same question that you need to know, how often does this happen? But it's just how I'm asking her, right? So again, it's sometimes just taking a moment, because again, our mind is running 100 miles a minute because we want to fix this, and we want to make sure she's safe. But we have to slow down a little bit and ask those questions, right? Because it is so challenging to talk to abused women. And I'm going to tell you, I've been in this business a really long time, and it's really challenging to talk to abused women because everybody is different, and everybody looks at it different, and it's not a good topic. Okay? And I'm going to let you know, by the way, that caregivers are at high risk of being abused. So as I'm here talking to nurses and social workers and community workers, we are at very high risk of being abused. And most people say, I don't understand, what are you talking about? That's so silly, like, because we know better. That's exactly the problem. Because who do I talk to? Right? So we talk about barriers in supporting and talking to abused women. How do we support each other? Because what happens is, earlier to what I talked about, if, let's say I'm a public health nurse and I'm being abused, do I tell my coworkers that I'm being abused? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to look at me differently? Are they going to doubt my ability to do my job? What is my boss going to say? So sometimes we talk about working with clients and how we focus with clients, which is very important, of course. But sometimes we're more generous and empathetic with our clients than we are with each other. And that goes back to what we talked about, our judgments and our thoughts. And we need to know that how we feel and how we treat each other comes out in how we talk to clients. So we talk about the challenges. I would say the biggest challenge is us. And I'm going to keep saying that back to you. How do you feel? How are you feeling about it? What's going on in your mind is 10 times worse than what's going on in hers. Because sometimes we get so caught up in saying the right words and not saying the wrong thing that we just say the wrong thing because we're just reading off a script. Okay? So I want you to think about that. She's the only one that can decide what she wants to do. We already talked about that. And I already told you it's really hard for everybody because she's making a stupid decision, right? And I'm going to use that word. And I can be really pretty and give social work words. And, you know, there's many different reasons why she can stay. And there's many different reasons why she chooses to stay. And for me to say it's a stupid decision, that's just a comment, right? I might think it's a stupid decision. But sometimes we need to look at what's happening for her, because that might really be her best decision. And that's really hard for that sometimes, right? Because we'll look at it like, well, how can that be her best decision? But sometimes, again, it's not knowing her life and not making judgments. If he sponsored me, is it my best decision to leave him and take my chances in court and not be sure if I'm going to be able to stay in Canada or not? Going back to a war-torn country where now I left my husband? Or going back to a place where my family won't take me in because I took my husband? Is that safer than being with my abusive partner? One has to ask themselves that. Is it truly safer than being with him? That's not a decision that I can make. But often those are decisions that go through people's minds. Well, we have a legal system for that. Well, you can call the police for that. But if I'm an abused woman, what does that mean to me? What does calling the police mean to me, right? Women often blame themselves, right? I knew he was a jerk. Why did I marry him? I knew he was being mean to me. Why would I have gotten pregnant? I knew this happened. I make him mad. Your response, your very first response, will change everything from that conversation. If your response when she says to me, he hit me, is what did you do? There's very little you can say after that conversation. Because no matter what else you say, you just told her that it's her fault. Because you just asked her what she did. And you can have all the pretty words and all the wonderful logic and all that's so bad and all the nice things, but the first thing you said to her is, what did you do? Right? And that's what I want you to think about. When you say, what did you do? You shut her down. Right? So when she says something like, I knew he was a jerk before I married him anyways, I don't know what I was thinking, and you're like, yeah, what were you thinking? Or, well, if you knew he was a jerk, why did you marry him? Versus, right? Married or not, he has no right to treat you this way. Right? So think about what I just said. Versus saying, so you knew he was abusive before you married him, but you married him anyway? Because now I'm judging you. Right? Versus, like I said, married or not, he has no right to treat you this way. Because you're not, again, going back to supporting, I'm not going to support her and say, you knew he was abusive, but you married him anyways. What a good idea. But it doesn't matter now. Going back to the questions that I have to ask or need to ask, it makes absolutely no difference. She's married now. So the question is not about before. The question is what's happening now. and is focusing on the behavior now, not her decision to get pregnant, right? So, for example, he was abusive before you got pregnant, but you decided to have a baby with him. Again, what did I just say? You did this. You chose to have this baby. You're not very smart. You're really stupid. You're a bad mother. You're not a good person. That's all that I just said to her in one word. Versus, it's not your fault that he's being abusive towards you. Being pregnant and has a small child does not change your right to be free from abuse. And that's also really hard for people sometimes too. They're like, well, he's my child's father. What am I going to do? Or he's my child's father. I want him to see the baby. One thing they talk about is, what does him seeing the baby have to do with him abusing you? Because sometimes it's to put it back to them and make them think about it, right? I always put it back to women. Well, you say that you want him to see his son. Does he have to be with you to see his son? Well, no, but he doesn't. He said he's not going to come if he can't be with me. Well, if he really wanted to see his son, he would come see his son. This sounds more like he just wants to come see you. But if he's being abusive to you, do you want him to come see you? Right? And again, that's up to her. But I want her to think about what she said because, again, it's so easy to minimize the abuse, minimize the situation, right? And justify his behavior. And I'm justifying his behavior by minimizing it, right? Well, he's a good father. One of the things I ask people sometimes is, what makes him a good father? Right? He's a really good father. I'd be like, oh, he hits you, but he's a really good father. What do you consider good father qualities to be? Right? Or I'll say, oh, he's a really good father because, he picks him up and he plays with him and, he does this or that. Okay, well, if you guys weren't together and he was a really good father to his kid, could he still pick him up after school and play with him? Could he still do that with him if he didn't live with you? So again, I'm not telling her that's an excuse. I'm not telling her that you can leave him. I'm just letting her know what some of her options are, right? And challenging her to think outside the box. So, asking questions, moving along here. So your eyes look swollen. That's a big bruise. People think it's better to say nothing. It's not. Because a lot of abused women really think that you don't know. They really think that you don't notice it. They truly believe, or more importantly, they truly believe that you believe their story. And one of the things I usually say is when somebody's lying about something like that, they give way too many details, right? So how was your weekend? Oh my goodness, it was terrible. I woke up, I was so tired, I got out of bed and I had a really rough night and then I was really dizzy and then I went downstairs because I was just really hungry and I wanted a glass of water and I wanted some food, but then I was in a hurry and I wasn't paying attention and then there was a toy on the stairs and they give you this whole explanation about how they fell down the stairs. While most people just say, I was really tired and I slipped and I fell on the stairs. Because part of it is they know they're lying and they're embarrassed, so they're trying to extend the story, right? They're trying to extend the story. So you can just ask them. And at the end of the day, they will probably lie, right? Margaret, how'd you get that bruise? I fell down. Oh, what were you doing? I was, skipping. Oh, okay, you should be more careful. At the end of the day, I don't necessarily believe her, depending on what the bruise looks like or where it is. But I'm letting her know that I've seen it. So that if I have to go back to her another time and be like, Margaret, you have another bruise. What happened? And she's like, oh, my goodness, I just keep falling down. I'm really kind of concerned. You've fallen down a lot. If there's anything that you'd like to talk about, please know that I'm willing to talk to you about anything. Or, sometimes when we're stressed with being pregnant and stuff, sometimes we just need some extra resources. Here's a resource card if you want to talk to anybody. There's a lot of different people here that you can call. Because at the end of the day, you can ask her point blank if she's being abused, but 99% she won't answer you. And depending on your relationship with her, you're probably just going to shut her down because you've asked her a question that she's not willing to disclose. She's going to lie to you, and then she's going to feel really uncomfortable to be around you. And that's why sometimes I try just to, redirect the conversation. So if she says, no, I don't want to talk about anything. I'm good. Thank you so much. If you change your mind, you can always talk to me. Give her the numbers to call. If she says no, but you continue to see bruises, if there's more than one of you, maybe ask somebody else to touch base with her. Because again, it's acknowledging to her that people are seeing and that people care, right? So it's not just Margaret that's picking, it's not just Margaret that's got her nose in my business. It's Susie saw those bruises too, right? If she says yes, try to find a safe place to talk to her, right? And this seems really simple, right? But sometimes people, because they just start talking, and she'll just start talking. And again, going back to being uncomfortable and what's a safe space or not a safe space, if there's a whole bunch of people around you or you're in a group setting and you're standing in a corner, it's actually not the best place to talk to her. And it might even be better, even if you can't talk to her that day, to make another time. Then let her talk in front of other people, because again, you don't know how they're going to respond to her and how they're going to respond, or they're going to make her shut down, or she's going to be embarrassed to come back to group if somebody says something to her or says something to her partner. Because often, if you're talking about prenatal groups, they're often in buildings or in certain neighborhoods where people might know each other or know each other's partners. So those conversations really need to be done in private as much as possible, right? But remember what I said. Did somebody hit you versus tell me what happened. So do not say, did somebody hit you? Did somebody punch you? Did somebody beat you up? Versus, can you tell me what happened? Right? So when you're like, I'm really worried, Margaret. Do you want to talk about what to do? Can you tell me what happened? Can you tell me where you got that mark from? Can you tell me what's taking place? Do you want to talk about what's happening at home? Something happened in group and I was a little bit concerned. Do you want to talk about it? Right? Versus calling out something that feels scary. Right? And just remember, she's probably going to say no the first time, right? And that's okay. Just make sure that you make her know that the door is still open. So it's not you asked me, I said no, and now I can't come back, right? Individual barriers. So do not think what a victim should look like. Sometimes people are like, I'm a victim, so I should be crying and hysterical and, carrying on crazy. She might be more afraid of the consequences than the actual assault. So again, sometimes people look at the bigger picture, right? I have Children's Aid involved in my life. Children's Aid is Children's Aid is supervising me. If Children's Aid finds out that my boyfriend hits me, they're going to take my baby away from me. So when she's talking to you or you're addressing the issue with her, she's not thinking at all about her assault. She's thinking about Children's Aid taking her baby away from her. So again, you might have to make that phone call. It's very true. It's a reality, right? If her children are witnessing abuse or you think there's a safety risk for the baby. But it's having a conversation with her about, we want to support you. We want to help you. Children's Aid can help you. This is not about taking your baby. This is about making sure you're safe. Because if all you do is focus on the abuse, she's not listening to you. Because all she's thinking about is Children's Aid taking her baby. So she doesn't hear anything you're saying about how her relationship is unhealthy. All she's hearing is Children's Aid is going to take her baby. So that's when we go back to the original point about you really need to listen. You need to make sure you're hearing what she's saying. What is her conversation? What is she saying? Not what you think she should say. Not what you think her priority should be. What is she saying? What does this mean for her? Right? And again, we talked a little about the cultural stuff, right? Will it impact my life, right? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to drive me to see my mom? Who's going to buy diapers because he works and I don't? We must never underestimate that life happens. Life doesn't stop because I'm an abused woman. Life doesn't stop because I've called the police. Sometimes people forget that, right? If you think about your own lives, for people that live with somebody, usually your life is set up a certain way. The way that you pay your bills, the type of house you live in, the type of car that you drive is often based on two incomes. The person that picks up the kids when you work late every Wednesday is your partner. So what happens if you don't have a partner anymore? So these are decisions that women have to make. So we need to remember that sometimes. It's not just about you need to leave for your safety. It's what happens next. What happens when my family won't talk to me and I don't know anybody in the entire country? What happens when I don't know how I'm going to drive to go see my elderly mom because I don't have a car and her nursing home is out of town? What happens if he told me that he's going to get custody of my baby if I leave him and I've already lost one baby and maybe I'm scared he's going to get another one? So it's just remembering that she might have really genuine barriers to reporting to the police. And for some women, again, reporting to the police is not necessarily the best thing for her. And going back to not judging and listening and letting her say what's working for her, right? And it's really hard sometimes, like I said, but I want you guys to really think about that, right? Do not ever decide that she has to do this, right? Don't decide that she has to do something. Okay, case scenarios. We talked about this a little bit, right? What if you see a partner interaction in class that seems abusive? So first and foremost, don't jump to conclusions. This is really, really important. So, you hear him say something to her, or you hear him snap at her, our defenses go up because we've had this wonderful training on violence against women. It's take a step back. Everybody argues. Sometimes people say things they don't mean. And there's a lot of pressure when somebody's pregnant, as everybody knows, right? Just, be cautious of it. But don't jump up and down. Try to interact with her away from her partner. And even just, hello, how are you feeling? Not even necessarily any kind of big, corporate thing. And see his response. Because if he is abusive, she's an abused woman, he won't want you to have contact with her away from him. Because he knows his behavior. He knows what's going on, right? So he's going to very uncomfortably not really want you to be around her, right? He's not really going to want you to be around her or know what's going on, right? So you need to think about that as well, right? Just watch the littler things. Those are more telltale times. Like if you're talking to her and he's kind of shuffling around and interjecting and staring at her, one has to wonder what's going on. If he's doing his own thing and doing whatever, there's probably not a lot of concern. He doesn't care what she says to you. He's not worried about it, right? Try to engage with her about what you saw. So again, talk about the behavior, not the judgment, right? So I noticed he raised his voice, right? Versus he sounds really harsh, or he sounds really cold, or he sounds really rude. What is that about? Why is he yelling at you? What is this about? Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, right? We need to be careful how, again, because you don't want to shut her down. Just a question. Hey, that conversation, he seemed a little bit sharp. Like, is that how he usually talks to you? And see what she says. She might just say, well, he wasn't sharp. Then you might have a concern because, yeah, he was. Or she might be like, no, this didn't happen, right? This is unusual. So again, it's just trying to look and be aware, and sometimes we don't know. But don't make your whole job just focusing on trying to be a detective as much as just trying to be supportive, right? Because sometimes it's just hard to know, right? Any questions, guys? I'm going to give you a minute to see if you want to type anything. If not, we'll continue because I'm conscious of time. Okay. How do you bring it up in a mixed class? We talked about it a little bit before. Bring it up as a general topic. So if you've got men and women in the room, even though I usually say violence against women, when men are there, I do say domestic violence to kind of tone it down, right? And I also give like a little blurb. This could affect anybody. This could affect your friends. This could affect your family. This could connect your sister. It's always good to know just for the community. It's good to know information because sometimes it might be like, okay, I'm not going to come next week, or you don't need to come next week because this is about violence and you're not in a violent relationship, so you don't need to be here. So sometimes it's just good to pose it as it's good information overall. It's good information to have as a person. It's good information. You never know somebody in your community. You never know somebody you might meet. So, it's good to come to groups so we all support each other. Nobody feels left out so that they feel like they can come to these workshops without their partner saying, why are you coming? Or what is this about? Or we don't need to be at this workshop because you're not being abused, so you don't need to be there, right? Talk very general. Right? So again, don't talk about men do this, men do this, men do that, right? Talk about it in general, right? People can get support if they want to get support. Men can get support if they want to get support. Abusers can get support if they want to get support. Violence against women impacts lots of different people. There's always counseling options. There's always supports. Families can work through this, right? There's counseling programs for families. Because what we're trying to say to her, if he's there, is we're not telling you have to leave your partner. We're telling you that we can do this together, right? That we can support you guys. If you really truly want to be a family unit, we can support you as a family, which again, for most people, when you say violence against women, the option is you just move her out, right? So sometimes if she wants to be with her partner, it's helpful for her to think that there are other options, right? There's ways to be supported, right? And again, emphasize that they can talk anytime, emphasize the different resources that you've given to them. I encourage you to get the resources out early, the little cheat sheet we kind of talked about early in the workshops, and then I'd probably say give them again, right? You know, people get busy, they lose stuff, you know, here guys, I'm going to have it closer to the end of it, right? Just to make sure that people have an idea. Is there any questions anybody wants to ask me specifically? A situation or something that you can think of?
We can give a couple minutes for people to type in the answers, and in the meantime, I just want to say, as I close the meeting, everybody will get a link to the evaluation for this wonderful webinar that has really responded to the question, how do I talk about abuse in prenatal education classes? So I really appreciate what you've been able to convey here during this webinar. And I know with webinars, it's not the same as being in a classroom with people asking questions, but I do appreciate if people have any questions. And I know, for instance, at times, what may influence a woman to leave an abusive relationship may be the impact that it has on her children. And I don't know, Margaret, if you want to comment on that, or is that an approach that may be helpful to mention? Or
Well, I think it's helpful to mention if you ask in a way or you address it in a way that talks from a stance of support and not judgment. So if you say to her, you know, if your child sees abuse, they're likely to grow up and be abused. It's not untrue, right? Like, it's not untrue. It's true, right? But is that really the approach that you want to do? Versus, you know, sometimes we think that children don't know, but they do. And children see things and hear things, and, you know, the problem with that is, how does that impact people, right? How do they feel? How does your child respond to the tension in the house? How does your child make friends? You know, it's really hard for children that come from abusive relationships to make friends because they feel really uncomfortable to bring people home. They don't feel confident in themselves. Or often children that are abused act out and they respond. They themselves become violent or aggressive. So sometimes it's good to point out the behaviors that happen or the impact that happens for children versus you're putting your child at risk. Because again, now you're just judging her again because now she's a bad mom. So you're a bad person, and now you're a bad mom for having your child in this relationship, right? So the questions are, what are your thoughts on the routine universal comprehensive screening protocol? So I think it can be helpful because I think any kind of screening or process of asking is helpful. I think one of the challenges is, though, again, is that it takes away from the, for lack of a better word, the human side of it, I guess, for lack of a better word, because what happens is that we're so focused on checking these boxes and going through this process that we're not really listening to what she's saying, and we're not really picking up on the cues or signs that are more likely to be seen. Because, again, for most people, they don't necessarily disclose when you ask them. Right? So the thing about the system is that you're relying on people's information, people's responses, people's behaviors, where in actuality, often, if you pay more attention to what's happening. So if you're a nurse that actually visits somebody in the community and you notice her responses, right? Like you notice how she holds her baby, or you notice how she talks to you when he's there versus when he's not there. You notice, you know, the bruising or the markings or things that are different or the shutdown or different things that are happening, that I think is actually more helpful than any screening tool or protocol. So I don't say it's a bad thing. I'm just saying I really encourage people to use your instinct and your judgment and really focus on building that relationship, because it's your relationship with her that will make her tell you and seek support. Because once she tells somebody, she's really more likely to ask for support. Once she tells one person, she's really more likely to ask for support. The first time is the hardest time. And that's why I said it's so important that even if you don't know what to say, is that you simply say, that's really sad. I'm really sorry to hear that. That's not okay. That shouldn't have happened to you. Are you okay? Would you like to get help? So even if you don't know what help is, even if you don't know what to do with help, sometimes it's just even doing that piece. If you can understand what I mean, the difference, just that slight difference of knowing that you're offering her support because you care versus I'm offering you the support because I have to, right? It's very similar to how you would work with her if you're talking about a young baby, right? Usually you people can see how they handle the baby, that you care, right? You're handling this baby because you care, right? You're not picking up the baby and throwing the baby down and throwing out a diaper and flipping them over, right? You're truly handling her baby with love and care. So when you talk to her, she needs to see that and feel that you truly care. And then she will tell you information, and that'll be her open door for you to refer her to the most appropriate person, which is probably not you, right? So the most appropriate agency or counseling session or whatever she might need.
Oh, thank you. And I see another question has just popped up.
Yeah. So yes, I'm just looking at the questions. So during a home visit, I was speaking with a mother. The partner walked out of the room, slammed a cupboard, put on his coat, walked outside. It was very uncomfortable. Absolutely. The mother said it's nothing. So what I would say is, yes, it is very intimidating, very aggressive. What I would say, though, is that he left. And one of the things is that as abusive or controlling as he might be, a true abuser is not leaving. He's not leaving the room. So he's not saying he's not abusive, by the way. I'm just saying he left, but his behavior was definitely to make a point to her, right? His behavior was definitely to make a point that I don't want her here. I don't know why she's here. What is she doing here? You know, what's going on? But he also respects the authority of who you are. And sometimes we minimize that or we underestimate that, right? Which is one of the reasons why I talk to a lot of people that are public health nurses that go into people's homes, is the power that you have to make that connection with her is so much bigger than anything that a social worker like me could do. Because when you start talking to her about stitches and ripping and all these different really intimate things, most men walk out of the room. They don't want to hear it, right? So that's truly your opportunity to be alone with her. When you're showing her how to breastfeed or different things and seeing marks and having a discussion, you truly are connecting with her. So yes, when you see that uncomfortable behavior, that inappropriate behavior, is calling it out. Well, you know what? That's really not okay. Does that happen a lot? And see what she says. And she says, no, it's not a big deal. Oh, okay, I know it's not a big deal, but has it happened before? Right? And she might say no, she might say yes. And again, it goes back to that, okay, well, you know, if you ever want to talk about it, or okay, if you want to talk to somebody about it, or, you know, it can be really hard having a baby. Sometimes I approach abuse a little bit different, right? It's really hard to have a baby and be alone all day long. But, you know, if you ever just want to talk to somebody, talk about how you're feeling or whatever, you could call, you know, whether it's the Distress Center, the Assaulted Women's Helpline, whatever, right? But I would give more than one option. So, again, I'm not just giving her the Assaulted Women's Helpline as an example, right? Because, again, looking, they didn't disclose the time. She probably, again, it's unlikely they disclosed the first time or the second time. And oftentimes we don't even know. People will call us and, you know, like a neighbor will call and we'll say, just give them our phone number when they pick up the garbage. And the woman will call and say, I got this number. My neighbor gave it to me. I don't know why she gave me this number, so I'm just calling. And what I say to people is we get those calls often, believe it or not. My neighbor gave me this number. My coworker gave me this number. I don't know what this is about. I don't know why she gave me this number. What I say to people is that at the end of the day, if somebody gave me the number to the Diabetes Association, for example, I'm not diabetic. I wouldn't call. So when women call us and say, this person gave me the number, but I don't know why, and it's the Assaulted Women's Helpline, we know right then and there something's happening for her. So one of the things I want you guys to think about is she might never tell you that she picked up the phone and made that phone call. She might never tell you that she made that call. But when I go to workshops and presentations, I always get, not personally, but the line will say, I'll get a couple calls that will say, I was at a workshop today, I was at a prenatal program today, and the lady came and gave you my number. So within a week, any prenatal group, I do think the minimum calls I've ever gotten is 3 from a prenatal group, minimum 3. The minimum amount of calls, because the staff often say, how'd you hear about us, or how'd you get our number? So even though that person might not tell you, do not underestimate that they took your information. And that's sometimes really hard too, because if you don't know, right, you feel like you're like a broken record, right? Like I keep telling her, don't underestimate that she actually took that information and that she's making those phone calls and that she's thinking about her options. And she just didn't tell you, right? So I want you guys to think about it that way. Sometimes we want to see the end result, right? That's what we do, right? We want to see the end result. But to know that sometimes the end result is something that you might not never know. But that goes back to what I talked about, your responsibility, right? It's not your responsibility to make decisions for her. It's your responsibility to give her information and the resources to make her own decisions. And if you've done that, you've done an amazing job. Right? If you've given her the open door and she never ever talks to you about it, you've gone above and beyond because you let her know that somebody cared and there was hope. And she might never talk to you. But just the fact that you said that to her, because remember, she feels worthless, unwanted, unloved, unimportant, nobody's going to listen, nobody's going to care, nobody's going to hear me, right? But what you said to her is somebody hears you and somebody does care and there is an option. And whether or not she takes it today, tomorrow, next week, she always knows there's an option. And one of the things I would say to you is nothing is more important than hope, right? Hope is what makes us live, right? Hope is what makes most of you go to work in the day, right? One has to hope. One has to believe there can be something different. And if I'm an abused woman and I've shut down, I don't believe that there is something different. I don't believe that I do have those options, right? So I want you guys to think about it that way. Sometimes it's a little bit hard, like I said, right, to really, to think about it that way and to, feel, so overwhelmed. You know what I mean? Like feel so overwhelmed with all the things that are happening, right? But that's what I want you guys to think about when I say that to you. It's just really think about it that way, right? That you are making such change. Even being here in this workshop, you are making such change. And I know I'm making it seem really simple, but I'm telling you because I work the phone lines and I get those conversations. The staff talk about that where they literally say, my coworker gave me this card and I don't know why. My neighbor handed this to me when I was taking out the garbage. I don't know what this is about. But again, if they're calling the Assaulted Women's Helpline, they know what it's about. And sometimes it's a half an hour into the call before anything comes up. But that's our job, right? It's not your job. That's our job to make her talk to us. So that's what I just want you guys to think about, okay? Is just try not to feel so overwhelmed. Try not to feel like you need to fix it right away. Try not to feel like, you've got to have the magical answer or the fairy dust, I call it. Because if you guys have the fairy dust, please send me an email and tell me where to find it because I would love to use it, right? But it's just to know that even doing that much, you've done amazing. And that's what I think we need to remember when we work with abused women. Sometimes we just feel so shut down and we haven't done anything. You have, right? Whenever she makes that step of wanting to leave or wanting to get help, you would be somewhere on that path of helping her get there. So I should have said as well, for everybody that is in Ontario, which I believe is most people, just a side note for you, that our information is in the webinar. The Assaulted Women's Helpline provides all of our information for free. So you can go on our website or you can send an email and we can send brochures, pens, nail files, bookmarks, things that I have our number on them. If you want to give them out at workshops or presentations for your clients, you can do that. Okay? So
Thank
for
you
our last
very much. Yeah.
our last couple minutes, I can let everybody go home. I will just give it a minute if there's anybody that wants to clip something in. How do clients who do not speak English access the phone line? Very good question. So they have to speak enough English so we know what language they speak. This is very important, please and thank you, because people don't always say that. They just tell them to call the helpline. So they need to tell us what language they speak, and then we have a translation service. So we use language line. So it takes less than 2 minutes. Usually it takes about 45 seconds is the average time to get an interpreter on the phone. And we will get an interpreter in any language. We just need to know what language they speak, and they need to understand to give us a minute to get it. Our brochures come in 15 languages outside of English. So we have some of the most mainstream languages in brochures, but in regards to conversations, like I said, we can get almost any language that somebody wants to speak.
Okay. Well, thank you, Margaret, for that information. And by the way, there are mainly participants from Ontario, but we also have some from Quebec, Newfoundland, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and New Brunswick. I just looked at the registration list.
Okay, so I would say in Ontario. Yeah.
Yeah. And are you aware, I'm trying to think now, is there a central website that would cover other provinces? I thought there was something about shelters anyway for all.
There is a shelter net, which just lists shelters throughout the city. There is actually no Canada-wide domestic violence helpline. United States has one. It's something that we need to work on here in Canada. But there is no actual, like, for lack of a better word, one line or one website that goes all the way across. Different provinces have or don't have, depending on the province.
Okay, I just put a website there, sheltersafe.ca, that seems to, have information on shelters in different provinces, which may be a place to start if you're not from Ontario. I really, really appreciate your passion, as somebody has mentioned, on your passion and advice on how to approach the topic of abuse. And I like Aleta's comment that even to give an opening for future discussion is always good, and not close the door is wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Margaret, for connecting with us and providing that information. As I indicated, as I close that meeting, you should be getting a link to the evaluation, and in about half an hour to an hour, I will be sending the link again with the recording, the link to the recording. If you have colleagues that you feel could benefit from listening to the recording, that would be great. Do you have any other last parting words, Margaret? I'll give you the floor one more time.
I'm going to say to everybody, like I said, I just, and sometimes it sounds almost patronizing, but I want to say I genuinely meant what I said, that the calls that we get, women will say, I got the number from. And they will actually say, I got the number from my social worker last year. So, and that's what I'm saying. You might not see those responses, but I'm just being very genuine when I said we get these calls all the time, and they literally say, I got this number from. My nurse gave it to me, my social worker gave it to me, my doctor gave it to me, my neighbor gave it to me. She gave it to me like 6 months ago, but you know what? I didn't want to call, but I kept it. Right, but they kept the number somewhere. So that's what I would just say to you, is that sometimes it does seem like it's a null and void, like this is just ridiculous, like I'm just repeating myself. I'm being really honest with you when I say, truly, truly trust yourself that they do hear you, that you are truly making a difference. And sometimes it might not seem like that, but you are. So everybody have a nice day, hopefully not a depressing day from the conversation. And enjoy your afternoons.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.